Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. This is the Budget Subcommittee for the 2017 Mayor's Recommended Budget, where we hear budget presentations from each of our departments. And this afternoon's session is focused on, excuse me, Councilmember? We've begun. Excuse me, Senator. It's a tennis morning. We should be able to. That is absolutely correct. Thank you for joining us, Senator. This afternoon's budget presentation will be from the Community Planning and Economic Development Department, and then we'll be following that with the Regulatory Services Department budget presentation. As this is the budget subcommittee, there is no quorum required, as we'll not be taking any decisions or votes on anything, but council members will be joining us throughout the session as schedules permit. With that, I believe we're ready to begin, but we've been joined, of course, by Council Vice President Elizabeth Glidden, as well as Council Member Elisa Goodman, Chair of the Community Development Regulatory Services Committee. So, Mr. Taylor, whenever you're convenient, whenever you're ready, it's at your convenience. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, distinguished members of the committee. For the record, my name is Craig Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Department for Community Planning and Economic Development. I would also like to state for the record that I am joined by members of my executive team, Director Reimer, Director Brennan, Director Frank, Director Poore, and we're also joined by a member of our management team, Dr. Jack Byers from the Long Range Planning Division. First of all, I'd like to thank you for providing us with an opportunity to present the Mayor's 2017 recommended budget for CPED. I trust that you will find CPED's budget requests for 2017 to be relatively modest in comparison to the tremendous outcomes and value that is certainly being realized by the investments you are making to support the outstanding work that's being done by CPED's staff. I would like to begin this afternoon by providing you with an overview of what we plan to cover during the course of certainly this presentation. First, we will clarify the key points or the bottom line in CPED's budget summary. Second, we will provide an overview of all change items reflected in the 2017 budget. Third, we will overview the highlights of our outcomes and impact for each division in 2017. Fourth, we will cover how CPED will address the $260,000 budget reduction that's been identified as part of the Mayor's recommended budget for 2017. And fifth, we will provide an overview of both our CARS and CLIC budget recommendations for 2017. And finally, we will try to open the floor for any discussions or questions certainly that you may have relative to our budget for this year.
Mr. Taylor, thanks. Excuse the interruption. I just want to make sure if you could start the slideshow, I think you'll be able to advance it a lot easier.
Sure.
And colleagues, we've been joined by Councilmembers Yang and Councilmember Johnson. Just wanted to let folks know that I am using speaker management if it's more easier to get my attention if you'd like to make a comment or question during the process. So, sorry to interrupt. Mr. Taylor, you may continue, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to ask you to turn to pages 3 and 4 in your document. Again, just to point out some of the key highlights of the budget summary. The Mayor's total recommended budget for CPED in 2017 is $101,101,995. In an effort to put this number in context, financially speaking, please know that this represents roughly a 6% increase over last year's recommended budget. I would also like to point out that the total amount of CPED's new funding request for 2017 is $4.4 million. That essentially breaks down as $2,940,000 in the general fund and $1.5 million in the non-general fund. Moving forward, if you would please turn your document to page 13. I would like to just, if I may, preface what I'm going to say here by certainly saying that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for this year is $10.6 million. It's being allocated in three different ways: one for the traditional Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and $1 million for the Family Housing Initiative, and $1.5 million for NOAH, which is a new initiative. Change item number 1. The mayor's recommended budget includes an appropriation in the amount of $1.6 million for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This includes $100,000 in the general fund dollars and $1.5 million in non-general fund dollars. This is for one-time funding, and there are no FTE requests associated with this ask. As I'm certainly most of you are well aware, these funds will be used to support the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in an effort to continue and support the stabilization, rehabilitation, and production of newly constructed affordable housing across our city. This investment will also help to support a critical and necessary component of our community's success and its future, which is providing decent, safe, and affordable housing for all members of our city. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund is a catalyst for promoting community reinvestment and revitalization across our city. I would also like to point out that an important byproduct or benefit of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is that it helps to create jobs and expand the city's tax base. The trust fund also furthers affordable and mixed-rate housing choices for all demographics, which I believe supports our city's goal for growing the city. For 2017, we are requesting just under $8.5 million for our appropriation. I'd like to ask you to turn now to page 16 in your document. Change item number 2. The mayor's recommended budget includes an appropriation of $1.5 million in general fund dollars to support a new initiative called NOAH, Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing. This request is for one-time funding, and there are also no FTE requests associated with this ask. NOAH is a new investment for our city. The model for this initiative was developed under the leadership of both Councilmember Goodman and Andrea Brennan from our department. NOAH is an effort to address issues impacting not only the preservation of affordable housing in Minneapolis, but the growing shortage of affordable housing due to NOAH properties transitioning to higher rent properties. The goal is to leverage $1.5 million by bringing in funding from external sources. The goal ultimately is to come up with about $6 million to support this initiative. It is also important to point out that staff believe that the city's share of NOAH properties across the metro area are estimated to be approximately 23% of the entire metro area's existing and unsubsidized affordable housing. With that, I'd like to pause, and I'd like to ask Director Brennan to come forward and provide a little more detail on NOAH, and certainly to talk a little bit about the impact as well as the advantage this program will have on our residents.
Ms. Brennan, thank
Director
you.
Brennan. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I would just like to add that the Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing Strategy, or NOAA strategy, is really in response to major trends that we're seeing in throughout the metropolitan area, definitely in the city. And these are also trends that are happening nationally. There are a couple of, at least two real prominent nonprofit organizations that are working on developing some funds and a mechanism to be able to quickly respond to opportunities to acquire this naturally occurring affordable housing and have it be acquired by socially minded, mission sort of driven or mission oriented nonprofit or for-profit housing providers, and then those units would be preserved. So this proposed $1.5 million represents the city's support of this effort, recognizing that the loss of NOAA is a major issue for our city, and that we want to participate with our other nonprofit partners and other public entities. Hennepin County HRA has indicated, and they have approved a $3 million investment in this effort, and the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency has recently committed funding to this as well. The $1.5 million is expected to help us identify, acquire, and preserve somewhere between 100 and 200 units. It would be on a pilot basis, so we would try to employ these funds this year and then see what we can learn from that, and going forward what recommendations come out of that. We are currently working on criteria for the types of properties that would be eligible to be acquired through this investment. So we will be bringing that forward for council approval, hopefully yet this year, if not in January. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I do have a quick question before we have others in. Just of the 1.5 million from the city, is that being directed to a pool outside the city's control, or is that for self-determination of what we'd like to spend the 1.5 on?
At this point, we're still trying to establish the criteria for those funds. The idea right now is that the city would be investing in a pool, because that way we can take the 1.5 and then use that to leverage other investment from other sources so that we can accomplish more with those funds. And if that is the case, then we would be really qualifying who, that pool and that pool manager, and making sure that our criteria for acquiring properties are consistent with what their criteria are, and that we would also have some mechanism to be able to approve, delegated to the staff level, approve the projects to make sure that they are in fact consistent with our criteria.
Very good, thank you. Is that Council Member Goodman or Johnson? Goodman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering, Andrea, if you could just outline in dollars the total amount of money that is available for any nonprofit or for-profit CDC to apply for within the trust fund that makes up the 10.5 or 6 million. Because as you know, the downtown congregations have been sending out incorrect emails telling people that there's only 8 million in the trust fund, and that's not true. So perhaps you can just go through and note the money that's in it. I'd also like you then to go through and note for their benefit the $111 million we spend on affordable housing in the city of Minneapolis, which I believe far exceeds St. Paul, Bloomington, Edina, et cetera, combined. And then I also just want to note with regard to the NOAA preservation strategy, NOAA is a preservation and stabilization strategy for existing buildings. What priority do we place within the Affordable Housing Trust Fund on existing preservation and stabilization strategies?
Great. Chair Quincy, Councilmember Goodman. The $10.6 million that is proposed in the 27 budget is comprised of $8.1 million for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and that's traditionally the Affordable Housing Trust Fund with the specific trust fund criteria. Another $1.1 million for the Family Housing Initiative, and that those funds are directed toward meeting this huge need that we have for larger units those funds are targeted to 3-bedroom units for extremely low-income households. So households with incomes at or below 30% of the area median income, and households that are either at risk of or are currently experiencing homelessness. So families with children that are extremely low income in need of larger units. The remaining $1.5 million is targeted in the proposed budget for this NOAA strategy. Again, it's proposed this year as on a pilot basis to leverage additional funds and try to preserve what we see as an increasing loss of the unsubsidized affordable housing in the city.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
Ms.
please.
Brennan, so we could have just simply put in 10.5 and said, do whatever you want with it. Instead, we're saying as a set aside, the $1 million for family housing, which is going to fund a project in Councilmember Johnson's ward that we just approved or about to approve, which will create family units in the 12th ward, not an area that is overblown with affordable housing. And the NOAA strategy are simply set-asides within the larger trust fund. But we'll go through a trust fund-like competitive process, correct?
Correct. Chair Quincy, Councilmember Goodman. The benefit of the strategy this year is that we're seeing the loss of this unsubsidized housing is happening on a rapid fire basis. And so our ability to have a set aside from the trust fund dedicated for that purpose allows us to respond to something immediately. The trust fund serves a very important purpose of helping to produce and preserve our existing subsidized housing, which generally takes years to get accomplished. So projects apply, developers apply, and usually it's anywhere from a 2 to 5 year process. So that it's just a different strategy. It's a longer term strategy to try to produce and preserve affordable units, whereas the NOAA strategy is something that we can use immediately to try to preserve what we're losing today.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Brennan, we already have a set-asides outside of these set-asides within the trust fund, correct? Don't we set aside right now $3 million for senior housing within the trust fund?
Yes, that is correct. We have a set aside for senior housing. 2016 is the first year we had the set aside for the Family Housing Initiative, and now, and we also have within the trust fund we have priority for both new construction as well as rehabilitation of existing housing.
But to be clear, new construction in non-impacted areas and rehabilitation in impacted areas are the point criteria. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe you could have just addressed the larger amount of money that the city spends on affordable housing in addition to the $10.5 million in the trust fund.
Sure. So, Chair Quincy, Councilmember Goodman, the overall budget for affordable housing that where we dedicate to affordable housing production preservation, it includes not just the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and these set-asides we mentioned, but the city is under state statute. We are an allocator of low-income housing tax credits. We also have an entitlement bond allocation that we can use to issue tax-exempt bonds to finance the creation of affordable housing. And with that tax-exempt bond allocation, it comes with an automatic allocation of 4% tax credits. So we can use that authority in a couple of different ways. We can use that to create a first-time homebuyer program, which we're not necessarily, that's not something that is needed in the city at this time because there are others such as Minnesota Housing that provides that service. So what we've done is we've allocated all of those bonds for the affordable housing production. So the amount of bonding that the city has is roughly, I believe it's about $50 million a year. And that generates an additional $50 million, or not $50 million, but there's additional tax credit equity that is generated that is in combination with that. So when you factor everything in, you factor in what is actually being appropriated through the budget process, the allocation of tax exempt bonds, and the 4% tax credit equity that is generated as a result of that. The overall investment in affordable rental housing exceeds $100 million a year.
Thank you. Councilmember, does that conclude your question on that?
Well, I mean, I could ever go into all the money we're spending on affordable home ownership too.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm sure that will be part of the presentation. I just want to make it clear that it is incorrect to state that the city is only spending $8.1 million on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And I would urge the advocates to ask the suburbs in St. Paul what they're doing. I'm going to guess it's not very much.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just want to point out as well, just kind of adding some context, the 8.1 that's talked about comes from those traditional sources of ESG, HOPWA, CDBG, home funds, which are very restrictive. I think the investments that are being made by this council and Mayor Hodges over the last several years have demonstrated great flexibility with the infusion of more than $2.5 million in this year's budget coming from the general fund, which allows for some nimble use of those funds, not meeting some criteria, being very targeted, as well as some innovation strategies like the NOAA project that you've initiated. So just wanted to help clarify that. Why people think it looks like 8.1, because out of those traditional sources, but I think you really have to factor in, as Councilmember Goodman was pointing out, the other investments that the city's making in the affordable housing production program for rental housing. So thank you for your clarification and assistance on that.
Sure.
Are you going to be continuing, or is it back to you, Mr. Taylor?
Unless you have more questions on NOAA.
Not seeing any. Thank you very much. Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I will continue along that vein to certainly speak to the additional components of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So if I can get you, if I may, to turn to page 18 in your document. Change item number 3, the mayor's recommended budget includes an appropriation in the amount of $1 million in general fund dollars to continue funding support for the Family Housing Initiative. I know Director Brennan has spoke to that on some level and perhaps can continue to respond to additional questions. This program was launched in 2016 with a $1 million commitment from the mayor. This is a one-time request, and there are no FTE requests associated with this ANS. This program provides financial assistance to support the development of affordable housing that is targeted specifically at larger families that need at least 3 bedrooms. Families who benefit from this particular program are generally at or below 30% of AMI, and they are either homeless or certainly on the way, perhaps, to being homeless. According to our data, which has been done by staff, the vacancy rate for affordable 3-bedroom rental units is less than 0.5%, which certainly in my sense would tend to suggest that there's a high demand for these types of units across our city. With this additional funding, we will be able to assist in the development of at least 15 to 20 more new 3-bedroom units. I will, Director Brennan can certainly speak to more detail regarding this. When she comes up, she's going to also provide an overview of the outcomes and impact specifically tied to the housing division. With that said, I'm going to move forward and ask you to turn to page 22 in your document. The mayor's recommended budget includes an appropriation in the amount of $250 from the general fund to support the infill housing pilot. This is a new initiative. This request, again, is for one-time funding. There are no FTE requests associated with this ask. Earlier this year, City Council provided staff direction to CPED to create and support a working group consisting primarily of staff, for-profit and nonprofit developers to focus on this initiative. This working group was charged with identifying strategies to develop and market and sell 350 infill lots. Ideas generated from the working group will be compiled by CPED staff and used to come up with a set of recommendations that will hopefully frame a long-term plan or strategy for the infill development work that will happen moving forward in the future. Councilmember Yang chaired this group, and this initiative is part of his long-term vision to address blighted areas in North Minneapolis and to stimulate revitalization in these areas by finding solutions that help to convert these vacant lots into viable parcels of land that are used for new housing development opportunities. The $250,000 will be leveraged to attract additional funding from other sources. Initially, funding for the pilot will then be used to do two things. One, to provide development gap financing for interested for-profit and non-profit developers that are interested and willing to construct new houses on these vacant properties. The second, funds will be used to provide an incentive for home buyers that are interested in building homes on these lots as well. Over time, I am sure that other ideas and strategies will be generated that will help to support this work moving forward. It is also important to point out, I think, ladies and gentlemen, that there are indirect outcomes associated with this initiative. One certainly is that it will reduce the city's property management costs by moving these properties off our maintenance and tax list, our list. Secondly, it will provide contracting opportunities for our minority-owned firms and certainly for protected class workers in the workforce to be able to be a part of the construction and the building of these properties. And third, it will increase home ownership. And fourth, it will put these properties back on the tax registry. At this time, I'd like to ask Director Brennan to come forward and provide some overview of the highlights and accomplishments for the Housing Division in 2017.
Ms. Brennan?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So what you see here are two charts. The top chart shows the number of units that have been produced, either new constructed or preserved, so substantially rehabilitated and preserved. And those are units that are affordable at or below to households at or below 50% of the area median income. There's a yellow line that goes through that chart that shows what our production target number is. So the second chart, the second bar from the end is 2015, and then the last one is 2016. It's a projected number, what we think will be produced. So as you can see, in 2015, there were 343 units that were either produced or preserved. The blue shows new construction. The green shows preservation or rehabilitation. And some of those include the projects that many of you are familiar with: Commons at Penn, 515 on the Park, the Rose, Greenway Heights are some of the big ones. And then the number it's not unusual to see that kind of fluctuation from year to year, just because of the cycles of construction and how long it can take for projects to get fully financed and ready to go. 2016, the big number that you're seeing there in green has to do with a major refinancing that was done in a nonprofit partner, Aon. They have a portfolio of multiple, over 400 SRO type units that are getting refinanced and rehabilitated in 2016. The chart below is the same thing. It just adds additional units that were either newly constructed or preserved, rehabilitated, that are affordable at or below 80% of AMI. So the bottom chart captures the units between 50% of the area median income and 80% of the area median income. A lot of the developments that we fund with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, with bonds and tax credits, are mixed income projects that include a range of different affordability levels, which is something that we encourage at the 30% AMI, 50% AMI, 80% AMI. I can move on to the next slide unless there's any questions on this one.
Not seeing any questions. Reminders to my colleagues that Speaker Manage is available. It's easier to get my attention that way. But I think we're okay. Please continue.
This slide shows some of our accomplishments in our single-family development area. So the chart on the upper left-hand side shows the number of city-owned infill lots that have been sold for development. And as you can see there, there's quite a lot of activity from 2013 on. And that largely reflects the investment that the city has made in Green Homes North. So recently, the 106th Green Homes North home was approved for financing. And so that is largely reflected there and seeing the increased activity in those years. The bottom chart shows the number of city-owned properties that were sold for rehab. So these are vacant structures. And there's a significant increase in that since we revised our vacant housing recycling program. So you can see in 2015 and 2016, those 2 years alone are about, that equates to, I think, about 43 units. And all of the years from 2007 to 2014, the total of those years comes to 49 units. We're projected to sell another 10 units this year. So in the last 2 years, we will have basically sold more vacant structures than we have in the past 8 years. So we've seen a lot of improvement in that area. We've seen a lot of interest, increased interest. It's not just the sort of usual suspects of partners that we've worked with in the past. We've really increased, we've seen the increased interest from community members as well to acquire our property and rehab it. On the right is a map. This shows an accomplishment in 2015 where we created an interactive map of all of our properties that we have for sale. So this is something new that is accessible to the public so they can see what is available. I'd be happy to take any questions.
I'm very pleased you included that. That's a terrific innovation and part of our marketing effort, so it's much more active. So thank you for that. Any questions on this portion? Not seeing any. Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Moving forward, I would like to ask the committee to turn to page 29 in your document. Change item number 5. The mayor's recommended budget includes an appropriation in the amount of $25,000 from the general fund to support a newly created position in CPED called the Small Business Liaison. The request is for one-time funding. I just want to clarify for the record, this is not a position request. It is not a position request. The Small Business Liaison itself is being created as a result of CPED taking a vacant position and reassigning that position, as well as defining specific duties and responsibilities associated with the Small Business Liaison to carry this role moving forward. The $25,000 in funding will be used to support miscellaneous operational or other resource needs associated with the work being done by the Small Business Liaison. Basically, the Small Business Liaison position has been created in response to feedback or concerns that have been expressed by many small businesses as well as organizations that are serving small businesses in general. Their general concern has been that navigating the city can be a very arduous, challenging, and complicated process. The Small Business Liaison will assist businesses in navigating the city to help them address their needs and advance their interests. The liaison will also provide direction and information regarding the myriad of resources and programs the city has to offer to help small businesses grow and succeed in our city. And finally, this person will serve as an ombudsman on some level, as sorts, a central point of contact to connect businesses to the right people, both inside as well as outside of the enterprise, and to assist them in complying with and understanding whether it's licensing, permitting, and other regulatory processes and requirements that govern a business's ability to operate in the city. Moving forward, I would ask the committee to turn to
Councilmember Bender has a question.
Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think actually my question may be able to be answered by you or Mr. Frank potentially. So folks who are working with small businesses in the city, I know, are reaching out to council members to ask for a more significant investment in FTEs in the small business support area. Just wanted to note that. I think it would be helpful. I'm sure staff, I think we have a meeting coming up with my office and staff. I'm sure staff is also separately meeting with folks, but I think it would be helpful for us to understand staff's perspective at some point, kind of hearing from small businesses themselves and organizations working with small businesses, kind of what the hopes and expectations are for what that group of employees will accomplish